The air smelled of lilies and candles, and soft music played in the background as guests filled the ballroom. Everyone was dressed in their best, smiling and clapping as the evening celebration began. It was the engagement party of the year, a night that would bring together two respected families, both known for their wealth and reputation. Among the crowd stood a quiet young woman holding a tray of glasses for the guests. She wore a simple dress, nothing like the shining gowns around her. Her face was kind, though she carried a look of calm sadness. It wasn't that she didn't feel happy for her family. She just knew she didn't belong to this glittering world. At the center of the hall, her elder sister shone like a star. Everyone's eyes were on her. Her beautiful smile, her confident walk, her laughter that filled the room. She was the kind of person who made people stop and stare without even trying. The young woman watching her from afar had always known that her sister was their parents' pride. She was the one everyone admired, the one who made the family name respected in the community. The elder sister's fiancé stood beside her, a man from a powerful business family, known for his wealth but also for his generosity. People called him charming and driven, someone who could walk into any room and make it his own. He was polite and gentle, and though the younger sister had never spoken much to him, she could tell that he truly cared for her sister. That night was perfect, one of lights, music, laughter, promises of a bright future. Their parents walked around proudly, accepting congratulations as if everything in their lives had fallen into place. The younger sister smiled when people looked her way, but deep inside she felt small. She was happy for her sister, truly, but sometimes happiness came with a quiet ache. After the celebration ended, she went to the back garden to breathe. The air was cool, and she could still hear faint music from inside. She sat on the bench and looked up at the sky. The stars looked far away, peaceful, distant, untouchable. For a moment she wondered what her life would look like a few years from now. Her parents often reminded her that her sister was lucky. She had done everything right, married well, and made the family proud. But what about her? She had dreams too, not of wealth or luxury, but of a simple, meaningful life. She didn't know that the world she saw that night, all the lights and laughter, would soon shatter. A week later, everything changed. It happened suddenly, like a storm nobody saw coming. The two sisters were supposed to meet for lunch, but the elder one had to travel with her fiancé for a business meeting in another city. She had promised to call later that evening. The call never came. Instead, there was a phone call that froze the house in silence. The younger sister watched her mother drop the phone and scream. Her father ran out without saying a word. She didn't understand what was happening until her uncle told her in a low, shaking voice that there had been a terrible accident on the highway. The car had been crushed by a truck in the rain. Her sister and her fiancé had been inside. They rushed to the hospital, the younger sister clutching her mother's hand tightly, her heart pounding so fast she could barely breathe. The drive felt endless, filled with the sound of sirens and prayers whispered under trembling lips. When they arrived, the truth hit them like a wall. Her sister was gone. The doctor's face said it all before he even spoke. The younger sister couldn't move. She felt her knees weaken as her mother collapsed beside her. The only thing she remembered clearly was the smell of antiseptic and the sound of her father's voice breaking for the first time in her life. The fiancé, they said, was alive, barely. He was unconscious, connected to machines, his life hanging by a thread. The following days were like living inside a dream that refused to end. The house that was once full of laughter now felt hollow. People came and went, bringing food, flowers, and condolences that didn't make any sense. The younger sister sat in silence most of the time, watching her mother cry until she couldn't anymore. Her father became distant. He spent hours on the phone with business partners and friends trying to handle the fallout. It wasn't just grief that haunted him, it was fear. The engagement had tied the family to important financial and social connections. The businesses they had invested in together, the joint ventures, the media attention, all of it depended on that union. When her sister died, everything started to unravel. The younger sister didn't care about any of that. All she wanted was for things to stop hurting. She missed her sister terribly. They had their differences, but there was love underneath it all. She would have given anything to hear her voice again, even if it was just her telling her to clean her room or help with something trivial. A week later, Her father called a family meeting. The younger sister walked into the living room to find her parents, her uncle, and a few close relatives sitting together with serious faces. The air was thick and uncomfortable. Her father started speaking in a calm voice, but it was the kind of calm that made her uneasy. He talked about how much the family had lost, about her sister's dreams and the importance of keeping her legacy alive. He mentioned that the fiancé was still in a coma, and that his family was struggling with the situation as well. Then slowly the conversation shifted. Her mother placed her hand on hers and said softly, "We have to do something. We can't let everything your sister worked for fall apart." She didn't understand. "What do you mean?" she asked quietly. Her father looked at her directly, his eyes cold but desperate. "We want you to marry him." At first, she thought it was a mistake. Maybe they were talking about something else. She laughed nervously, waiting for someone to explain. But nobody did. The silence that followed made her heart drop. Her mother continued, her voice trembling but firm. "It's only on paper, just a formality. It will keep both families' names protected. When he wakes up, we can explain everything. You'll just be holding your sister's place until he recovers." The younger sister couldn't believe what she was hearing. "Marry him? He's in a coma, and he was engaged to my sister." Her father sighed. "This is not about love or feelings. It's about respect, stability, and honor. His family has already lost so much. If this alliance breaks, both sides will face humiliation. You're the only one who can fix this." Tears filled her eyes. "But that's not right," she whispered. "It's not fair to him or to me," her uncle spoke next. "Sometimes life gives us responsibilities we didn't choose. You're doing this for the family. Think of your sister. Wouldn't she want peace between both families?" She shook her head in disbelief. "You're asking me to replace her. You're asking me to pretend." Her mother's tone hardened. "Enough, we've made our decision. This is what needs to be done." That night, she locked herself in her room and cried until morning. She couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. She kept thinking about her sister and the man lying unconscious in a hospital bed. None of it made sense. It felt wrong, cruel, and unreal. Over the next few days, her family continued to pressure her. They told her it was only temporary, that she was helping everyone. They called it a sacrifice, a duty, a way of saving what was left. The more she refused, the more they guilted her. They said she was being selfish, that her sister would have wanted her to help. Her mother stopped speaking to her for 2 days. Her father avoided her completely. The house became cold and quiet. Eventually, she broke down. She couldn't take the silence anymore. She went to her parents and said she would do it. Her voice was barely above a whisper. The next few days passed like a blur. Arrangements were made quickly and quietly. Only a few people were told. The wedding wasn't public. It took place in the hospital room where the man lay motionless. She wore a simple white dress. There were flowers beside the bed, a priest and 2 witnesses. She stood there trembling as vows were read aloud. Her heart pounded so loudly that she could barely hear the words. When it was her turn to speak, she froze. Her throat felt dry and her hands shook, but she forced herself to repeat the words that were expected of her. She said, "I do," even though every part of her wanted to run. The priest signed the papers, her parents smiled for the photographs, and the nurse in the room wiped a tear from her eye. The younger sister just stood there staring at the man on the bed. He looked peaceful, unaware of the storm happening around him. After the ceremony, her mother hugged her tightly. "You've done the right thing," she whispered. "You've saved our family." But the younger sister didn't feel like she had saved anything. She felt like she had lost herself. That night, she sat by his bedside long after everyone had left. The machines beeped softly. She looked at his face, pale, still, lifeless, and whispered, "I'm sorry." Days turned into weeks. The story was made public in a carefully crafted way. The families told the media that the wedding was a touching tribute to her late sister's last wish, that the younger one had married the man to honor her sibling's memory. People called it moving, selfless, even beautiful, but behind closed doors she felt trapped. Every day she visited the hospital, sat beside him, and wondered what would happen if he ever woke up. What would he think? Would he hate her? Would he even remember anything? She tried to take care of the details, signing medical papers, speaking to doctors, helping the families stay connected. She became the bridge between 2 grieving houses. Everyone praised her for being strong, but inside, She felt hollow. Sometimes she would sit in the hospital garden watching people come and go. Life moved on for everyone else, but for her it stood still. The nurses began to know her by name, always greeting her with kind smiles. They admired her devotion, not knowing that every visit tore her apart a little more. One afternoon, as she was about to leave, she noticed his fingers twitch slightly. It was so faint that she almost thought she imagined it. She leaned closer, watching carefully. Then it happened again, a small movement, but enough to make her heart race. She called the nurse, who checked and said that sometimes small reflexes happened. It didn't mean much, but to her it meant everything. For the first time since the wedding, she felt a tiny spark of hope. Maybe one day he would wake up. Maybe then she could tell him everything, explain the truth, and finally be free from this strange life she never chose. That night, she couldn't sleep. She sat by her window looking at the stars again, just like she had that night at the engagement party. So much had changed, yet she still felt like the same quiet girl, invisible in her own story. She whispered to the sky, "Please let him wake up. Let him know the truth." And somewhere, in a hospital room filled with the soft sound of machines, a man's hand moved ever so slightly again, a silent sign that the story was far from over. The morning after the quiet hospital wedding, the house felt strange. The younger sister woke up early, but everything around her seemed different. The walls looked the same, yet the silence was heavier. The servants moved carefully, speaking in low voices as if afraid to disturb something sacred. Her parents acted calm, even cheerful, but their smiles looked forced. They sat at the breakfast table reading newspapers that carried the story of the emotional wedding. The headline praised her for her selfless act, describing her as the woman who had fulfilled her late sister's final wish. The photo of her standing beside the hospital bed was printed on the front page. She looked at the picture quietly. To the world it looked touching. To her it was painful. Her mother folded the paper and said proudly, "Look at this. Everyone is talking about how noble you are. Our family's name will never be forgotten now." She nodded silently and picked at her breakfast. She had no appetite. Her father was already talking about how this would help stabilize the family's business partnerships. He seemed relieved, as if the weight of shame had been lifted from his shoulders. Nobody asked her how she felt. Nobody noticed how her hands trembled when she held her cup. Later that day, she went back to the hospital. The nurses greeted her kindly, as they always did. One of them, an older woman with gentle eyes, said, "You're here again. You must really love him." She smiled faintly but didn't answer. What could she say? She didn't know what to call what she felt. It wasn't love, not yet, maybe not ever. It was more like responsibility mixed with guilt. She entered the room quietly. The man lay there, still as always. The machines hummed softly, and the sunlight through the window painted pale lines across his face. She sat beside him, her fingers twisting nervously in her lap. For a long time, she just watched him breathe. Every small movement of his chest gave her an odd sense of peace. It reminded her that he was still there, that maybe one day he would open his eyes and see the world again. She started talking to him. At first it was awkward, just a few words about the weather, the news, or how the flowers on the windowsill were starting to bloom. But with time, she found herself sharing more. She told him about her sister, about how strong she had been, about how everyone missed her. She even told him how afraid she felt, sitting in that room every day pretending to be someone she wasn't. Sometimes she wondered if he could hear her. She liked to imagine that somewhere inside he was listening, trapped between silence and memory, fighting his way back. Days turned into weeks. Every morning she went to the hospital. Every night she returned home to a family that spoke about money and appearances more than feelings. They treated her like a hero in public, but at home she was invisible. They expected her to play her role quietly, to keep the illusion alive. Her friends stopped visiting after a while. They didn't know how to talk to her anymore. Some whispered that the marriage was strange, that it wasn't real. Others pitied her. She learned to smile politely and change the subject. She began to live between two worlds, one inside the hospital, filled with quiet machines and whispered hopes, and the other inside her home, filled with expectations and silence. One afternoon, she overheard her parents talking in their study. She wasn't trying to listen, but their voices carried through the door. Her father said, "As long as she's married to him, The partnership remains valid. His family will stay connected to us. Once he recovers, we can negotiate the next steps." Her mother replied, "And if he doesn't wake up?" Her father sighed. "Then we'll find a way to handle it. But for now, this arrangement works. It keeps everything stable." The younger sister stood there frozen. She realized then that for her parents, the marriage wasn't about love or honor. It was business. She was just a piece of their plan. That night, she cried quietly in her room, not because she regretted helping, but because she finally understood how alone she truly was. Despite everything, she kept visiting the hospital. She found comfort there, in the steady rhythm of the machines and the gentle voices of the nurses. The man's family came by occasionally, bringing flowers and asking for updates. They were polite to her, but distant. It was clear they still saw her as an outsider, someone who didn't belong in their world. One day his mother came to visit. She was an elegant woman, always composed and graceful, though her eyes carried years of sadness. She looked at the younger sister and said softly, "You've been kind to him. I know this hasn't been easy." The younger sister smiled politely. "I just hope he wakes up soon." The woman nodded. "He was always so full of life. I still believe he'll open his eyes again. He's a fighter." For the first time, the younger sister saw genuine warmth in the older woman's expression. It made her heart ache. She wanted to tell her the truth, that she never wanted this marriage, that it was all a decision made by others. But she couldn't bring herself to say it. The woman looked at her with such gratitude, such fragile hope that she didn't want to break it. After she left, the younger sister stayed by his side longer than usual. She watched the slow movement of his chest, the soft hum of the machines. She whispered, "Everyone is waiting for you. Please just wake up." A few days later, something unexpected happened. It was early morning, and she had just finished arranging fresh flowers by the bed. The room was quiet except for the rhythmic beeping. She turned to leave, but then she heard a faint sound, like a sigh. She froze and turned back. His fingers twitched. It wasn't just a reflex this time. It was clearer, stronger. She called for the nurse, her heart racing. They checked his vitals, their faces lighting up with cautious excitement. "There's improvement," the nurse said softly. "He's responding to stimulation. It's a good sign." The younger sister felt tears in her eyes. She didn't know what it meant or how long it would take, but it was the first real hope she'd felt in months. She sat by his side, holding his hand gently. "You're coming back," she whispered. "I know you are." Over the next few weeks, his condition began to improve slowly. He started showing small signs, moving his fingers, shifting slightly, sometimes making faint sounds. The doctor said it could take time, maybe months, but they were hopeful. Her visits became longer. She read to him, told him stories about the world outside, played his favorite songs that his family mentioned. She started feeling a strange kind of peace in those moments. It was as if caring for him gave her life a meaning she hadn't known before. But at home, things were still the same. Her parents were impatient, arguing about finances and public image. They wanted her to attend social events, to smile for cameras, to play the part of a devoted wife. She did as they asked, though every time she smiled for a photo, she felt like a stranger in her own skin. One night, her father told her to prepare for a public appearance, a charity dinner hosted by her late sister's fiancé's company. "It'll remind people of your unity," he said. The media loves that story. She didn't want to go. She wanted to stay by the hospital bed where things felt real, but her father's tone left no room for choice. At the event, the lights were bright and the conversations loud. People came up to her, offering kind words and admiration. "You're so brave," one woman said. "It's so inspiring how you're keeping his memory alive." She smiled politely, nodding, even though each word felt like a heavy weight on her heart. Nobody knew the truth. Nobody saw the confusion behind her calm face. When she returned to the hospital that night, she found herself running down the hallway, desperate to be back in the quiet room. She sat beside him again, her hand resting near his. The machines beeped softly in the background. "I don't know why I'm here," she whispered. "Maybe fate just wanted me to be part of your story. But if you wake up, please understand that I didn't choose this. I just did what I thought was right." Her voice cracked as she spoke. She didn't know that one of the nurses standing at the door overheard her words and felt her heart twist with sympathy. Over time, the nurses began to admire her strength. They saw how she came every day, how she sat patiently and talked to him for hours. One of them once told her, "Sometimes love isn't about choice. It's about showing up when no one else will." The younger sister smiled faintly. "Maybe, but I'm not sure what this is anymore." Weeks passed and her life became a quiet rhythm. Hospital visits, family obligations, endless pretending. But deep down, something was changing in her. The fear and confusion were slowly turning into quiet determination. She realized that no matter what others expected, she had her own heart, her own sense of right and wrong. One evening, as she was about to leave the hospital, she felt a hand touch hers. She turned sharply, her breath catching in her throat. His fingers were curled around hers, weak but unmistakable. She looked up quickly, her eyes wide with shock. His eyelids moved slightly, a small tremor that made her heart race. She called the nurse, who hurried in, checking his vitals and whispering, "He's responding more. It might be soon." She stood there, frozen between disbelief and hope. That night she couldn't stop thinking about it. Lying in bed, she stared at the ceiling, replaying that small touch over and over again in her mind. It was the first time she had felt truly seen, even if it was just a reflex. For months she had been living like a shadow. But now, for the first time, it felt like the story might change. She didn't know what the future held. She didn't know if he would remember anything, or if he would even want her in his life once he woke up. But deep inside, she whispered a silent promise to herself. No matter what happened, she would tell him the truth. She wouldn't live behind lies anymore. The next morning, as the sun rose over the hospital building, she walked down the familiar hallway, her heart pounding with cautious hope. The story that began with tragedy was slowly, quietly, beginning to stir again. She took a deep breath, opened the door to his room, and walked in, ready for whatever waited beyond the silence. The morning air was crisp, and sunlight streamed softly through the hospital windows. The younger sister walked slowly down the familiar corridor, her heart pounding. She had come every day for months, but today felt different. Something inside her whispered that things were about to change. When she reached his room, she paused by the door for a moment, listening. The steady beeping of the machines was still there, calm and rhythmic. She stepped inside quietly and placed a small bouquet of fresh flowers on the table. Then she sat in the chair beside his bed, as she always did. But as she reached to adjust his blanket, his fingers moved again. Not just a faint twitch, but a clear, small movement. Her breath caught in her throat. She leaned closer, eyes wide, watching every slight motion. His eyelids fluttered just for a second, but it was enough to make her stand up and call the nurse. The nurse hurried in, followed by a doctor. They checked his pulse, his reflexes, his breathing. After a few tense minutes, the doctor smiled gently and said, "He's showing consistent response. This could mean he's coming out of the coma." Her eyes filled with tears. For months she had waited for these words. She didn't even realize how tightly she had been holding her hands together, until the nurse touched her shoulder and said softly, "You should get some rest. He might wake up soon. It could take hours or days." She didn't want to leave, but they gently insisted. She stepped out of the room and sat in the hallway, her mind racing. What would she say to him when he woke up? How could she explain what had happened? He had gone to sleep engaged to her sister and would wake up married to her. Hours passed and she couldn't bring herself to go home. Her parents had already called several times asking for updates, not out of love but out of worry about what the recovery might mean for their public image. She didn't answer their last few calls. She needed to think on her own. Late in the evening, she returned to his room. The lights were dim and the machines beeped softly. She sat beside him again and whispered, "Please wake up. Everyone's waiting for you. I'm waiting too." And then it happened. A faint groan escaped his lips. His head turned slightly. She froze, afraid to move, afraid that if she blinked, it would stop. Slowly, painfully, his eyes opened. For a moment, he looked lost, confused, as if he didn't know where he was. The light was too bright, the room too quiet. He blinked several times before his gaze settled on her. She stood still, unsure what to do. The nurse rushed in, calling for the doctor. The room filled with quiet excitement as they checked his vitals. The younger sister stood near the wall, hands trembling, watching as they spoke to him gently. He couldn't speak clearly yet, but his eyes moved, trying to understand. The doctor smiled and said, "Welcome back. You've been asleep for a long time." His voice was weak. "How long?" "Almost 6 months, the doctor said softly. "You had an accident, but you're safe now." He looked confused again, his eyes searching the room until they landed on her. He frowned slightly, trying to remember. Where's... He paused, struggling with the words. She stepped forward, her voice shaking. You don't have to talk right now. You need to rest. But he kept staring at her, trying to place her face. She could see the questions forming in his mind. Before he could speak again, the doctor said gently, We'll talk more tomorrow. Let's focus on recovery first. She left the room quietly, her chest tight. He was awake, alive, but the hardest part was just beginning. The next few days were filled with constant medical attention. His recovery was slow but steady. He started to remember things in fragments. The road, the rain, the headlights. And then nothing. The doctors said memory loss was normal after a coma. It would take time for everything to come back. She visited him every day, sitting quietly as he tried to piece together his past. Sometimes he asked questions about his business, his parents, or his friends. But one afternoon his eyes turned to her again. You've been here every day, he said softly, his voice still weak. Who are you? The question hit her harder than she expected. She opened her mouth but couldn't speak. The truth sat heavy on her tongue. She looked down and said quietly, Someone who wanted to make sure you were okay. He nodded slowly, as if trying to process her words. Thank you, he whispered. The next day, his parents arrived. The reunion was emotional, tears, laughter, and disbelief that their son had come back to life. They hugged him tightly and thanked every nurse and doctor in the room. When they saw her standing quietly in the corner, his mother reached for her hand and said, He's awake because of you. You never gave up. Her throat tightened. She just smiled and looked away. She couldn't take the praise. She knew the truth, that she hadn't done it out of choice but out of pressure. Still, seeing him alive made everything she had endured feel worth it somehow. A few weeks later, he was well enough to leave the hospital. The media was everywhere, cameras flashing, reporters calling it a miracle recovery. The younger sister stood beside him during the photo session arranged by both families. Her hands trembled slightly as the journalists shouted questions. How does it feel to have your husband back? One of them asked. She forced a small smile and said, It feels like a blessing, but inside her heart was twisting. Every time someone called him her husband, she felt the lie tightening around her. He still didn't know the truth. At home, her parents were busy managing the public image. They gave interviews, arranged charity events, and spoke about how faith and family had carried them through. They never mentioned how they had forced their younger daughter into that marriage. Meanwhile, the man slowly began regaining his strength. He spent hours reading, relearning things, trying to reconnect with the world he'd lost. Sometimes he would find her sitting quietly by the window, staring at nothing. He would ask her simple questions. How she had been, what had happened while he was unconscious. She always answered carefully, leaving out the part that mattered most. One evening, as they sat together in the garden, he said softly, I keep dreaming about someone. I think it's her, your sister. His voice trembled slightly. I see her face, but she doesn't speak. I wake up before she does. She felt her chest tighten. Maybe it's just your memory coming back, she said gently. Sometimes the mind remembers before the heart is ready. He nodded, looking away. I just wish I knew what really happened. Everyone says she's gone, but it doesn't feel real. She looked down at her hands, unable to meet his eyes. She loved you, she said softly. She really did. He turned to her then, his eyes searching hers. And you? He asked quietly. The question caught her off guard. Me? She repeated, unsure what to say. You're always here, he said. You take care of me, talk to me, listen to me. Why? She swallowed hard. Because I promised to look after you, she said finally. He didn't press further. He just nodded slowly as if accepting her answer. But from that day on, she noticed something changing between them. He started looking at her differently, with curiosity, sometimes even warmth. He began to depend on her more, asking her opinion, smiling when she entered the room. At first, she told herself it was nothing. He was just being kind, but deep down she felt the pull too, a quiet connection she couldn't explain. Yet every time she felt her heart soften, guilt followed. How could she let herself feel anything when their bond was built on a lie? He didn't know she had been forced into this marriage, that it had all been arranged while he lay helpless. One evening, as they had dinner together, he said suddenly, Do you ever think about starting over? She looked up, startled. What do you mean? He smiled faintly. I've been given a second chance at life. I want to live differently now. Not for money or fame, but for peace, she nodded quietly. That sounds nice. He studied her for a moment and said softly, Maybe you need a second chance too. Her heart skipped a beat. He didn't know how true his words were. Over the next few months, they grew closer. They talked more, laughed sometimes, even shared quiet walks in the garden. He began to rely on her presence, saying that she made him feel grounded. And though she tried to keep her distance emotionally, it became harder every day. But her parents noticed the change too. Her mother warned her one night, Be careful what you feel. This arrangement was never meant to be real. She looked at her mother sadly. Maybe that's the problem. Nothing in this house ever feels real. Her mother didn't reply. She simply turned away, pretending not to hear. As time passed, the younger sister found herself at a crossroads. She wanted to be honest with him, to tell him everything, that she had never chosen this, that the marriage had been her family's idea, that she had only wanted to protect him and his family from more pain. But every time she opened her mouth, fear stopped her. What if he felt betrayed? What if he hated her for keeping the truth from him? One night, she decided she would tell him the next day. She rehearsed the words in her head as she lay in bed, whispering them to the dark room. You deserve to know the truth, she said softly to herself. You deserve to choose your own life, but fate had its own timing. The next morning, she woke to the sound of the phone ringing. It was his mother, her voice filled with joy. He's been cleared for full recovery. The doctors say he can start traveling again soon. We're planning a small celebration. The younger sister smiled politely, but inside she felt nervous. A celebration meant attention, cameras, and questions, things she dreaded now more than ever. That evening, during the small gathering, he stood up to speak. He thanked his family, the doctors, and then turned toward her. And her, he said, his voice warm and steady. The person who stayed by my side when I didn't even know who I was. I don't know what I would have done without you. The guests clapped and she smiled, her eyes glistening. But as everyone raised their glasses, she whispered to herself, You have no idea. When the crowd dispersed, he found her alone in the corner, looking out the window. You look sad, he said softly. She turned to him. I'm not sad. Just tired, he shook his head. No, it's something else. I can see it in your eyes. She hesitated, then said quietly, There's something I need to tell you. Before she could continue, one of his relatives called him from across the room. He smiled apologetically and said, Later, I promise we'll talk later. She nodded, though her heart ached. That night, as the party lights faded and the house grew quiet, she stood by her window again, staring at the stars, the same way she had on the night of her sister's engagement. The night everything changed. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But she knew one thing. The truth couldn't stay hidden forever. And when it came out, everything, her life, his trust, their families, and would never be the same again. The morning after the celebration, the house was quiet. The younger sister woke early, the sunlight spilling softly across the floor. She had barely slept. Her mind had replayed the same thought again and again. I have to tell him the truth. She walked to the balcony and looked out at the garden. The air was cool and the city beyond was still half asleep. For a moment, she thought about how different everything might have been if her sister were still alive. Would she still be standing here, caught between duty and guilt? Probably not. But life had led her to this point, and now there was no turning back. She dressed simply and went downstairs. The housekeeper told her that he had gone for a morning walk by the lake nearby. It had become his routine since recovering, quiet walks that helped him clear his head. She followed the familiar path to the lake. The breeze brushed gently against her face and the water shimmered under the morning sun. She spotted him standing near the edge, tossing small pebbles into the water. He looked calm, peaceful even. For a moment she hesitated. How could she disturb that calm with the truth? Still, she knew she couldn't wait any longer. She walked closer, her footsteps soft against the gravel. He turned around as he heard her, a faint smile on his face. You're up early, he said. Couldn't sleep either? She shook her head. I needed to talk to you. His expression changed slightly, concern mixed with curiosity. Is everything all right? She took a deep breath. No, she said quietly. Not really. They sat down on a wooden bench near the water. The silence stretched between them for a few moments before she finally found the courage to speak. "There's something you don't know," she began. "Something important, and you deserve to hear it from me." He turned fully toward her, his eyes searching her face. "Go on," he said softly. She hesitated, her voice trembling. "When you had your accident and went into the coma, everyone thought you wouldn't make it. My family, your family, and they were desperate. The engagement had already been public. The media was talking about it, and both families had business and reputation tied to it." He frowned slightly but stayed silent, letting her continue. "Your parents wanted to protect your image and mine wanted to protect theirs. And then my sister," her voice caught, saying her sister's name still hurt. "She passed away before the wedding could happen." He froze, the memory of his late fiancé flashing in his eyes. "I remember hearing that," he said quietly. "But I thought it happened after I—" She nodded. "Yes, and after that everything became worse. Reporters kept asking questions, people were talking, and then one day our parents decided the marriage would still go on." He stared at her, not understanding. "What do you mean?" She swallowed hard. "They made me marry you while you were still in the hospital." For a moment he said nothing. The world around them seemed to stop. No sound of water, no chirping birds, just silence. Finally, he spoke, his voice low. "They had made you?" She nodded again, tears welling in her eyes. "They said it was to protect both families, to stop rumors, to honor the engagement. I didn't want to do it, but they didn't give me a choice. I was told it was only a formality, that you'd never wake up and that no one had to know. But then you did wake up, and everything changed." He leaned back on the bench, his face pale, trying to absorb what she'd just said. "So we're really married?" "Yes," she whispered. "Legally, yes. But it wasn't supposed to be real. It was supposed to be temporary." He didn't respond. His hands trembled slightly as he stared at the lake, his reflection rippling in the water. After a long moment, he said quietly, "Why didn't you tell me before?" She wiped her eyes. "I wanted to. Every single day. But I was scared. You had just come back from a coma. I didn't want to hurt you again, and then we started spending time together and it just became harder." He turned to her slowly. "Harder because you started caring?" She didn't answer. She couldn't. Her silence said enough. He sighed deeply, running a hand through his hair. "So all this time you were carrying this alone?" "Yes," she said softly. "I never wanted to deceive you. I just didn't know how to fix what others had done." The look in his eyes was unreadable. Not anger exactly, but deep confusion and disappointment. He stood up and walked a few steps away, his back to her. "Do my parents know you wanted to tell me?" "They know the truth," she said. "But they don't want anyone else to know. They're afraid of what people will say if it comes out." He let out a bitter laugh. "Of course. Always about reputation." He turned back to face her, his eyes sharp now. "And what about you? What do you want?" She looked down at her hands. "I don't know anymore," she admitted. "I just want to stop living a lie." He stared at her for a long time, then said quietly, "I need some time." She nodded. "I understand." He walked away slowly, leaving her sitting alone on the bench. The breeze picked up, rustling the leaves, and she sat there until the sun rose high above the lake, feeling the weight of everything she had just said. For the next few days, he barely spoke to anyone. He stayed in his study, avoiding family dinners and gatherings. When she passed by his room, she could hear faint music playing, the same old piano pieces he used to love before the accident. Her parents noticed the tension immediately. Her mother pulled her aside one evening and whispered, "What did you do?" He looks upset. "I told him the truth," she said simply. Her mother's face went pale. "You what?" "He deserved to know," she said, her voice firm this time. Her mother shook her head, angry and scared. "Do you realize what you've done? If this gets out, it'll destroy both families. Everything we built will crumble." "I don't care about that anymore," she said quietly. "I care about what's right." Her mother looked at her as if she didn't recognize her anymore. "You've changed," she said coldly. "Maybe too much." That night, the younger sister sat in her room thinking about his face when she told him everything. The shock, the hurt, the silence. She wondered if he would ever forgive her, or if she had lost him forever. The next morning, a letter was slipped under her door. It was his handwriting. Her heart raced as she opened it. It said simply, "Meet me by the lake at sunset." She felt her stomach twist with both fear and hope. When she reached the lake that evening, the sky was painted in soft shades of orange and pink. He was already there, standing by the water as before. She approached slowly, unsure what to expect. He turned to her. His face was calm but serious. "I've thought a lot about what you told me," he said quietly, "and I realized something. You could have kept lying, and no one would have known. But you didn't. That says something." She looked at him, unsure what to say. "I didn't want to keep pretending," he nodded. "I know, and I appreciate your honesty. But I also need to be honest with you." She braced herself. "When I first woke up, I didn't remember much," he said. "But now pieces are coming back, the accident, the plans, your sister. I loved her. But she's gone and I can't live in the past forever. Still, knowing the truth about how all this happened, it's hard to process." "I understand," she said softly. He looked out at the water again. Maybe we both deserve to start over, separately. Her heart sank. "You want to end it?" He sighed. "I don't know yet, but I need time to find myself again. Not as someone's fiancé, not as a victim, not as a husband in name only. Just me." She felt tears in her eyes, but she didn't try to stop them. "If that's what you need, I'll respect it," she said. He looked at her then, his eyes softer. "You've been through enough. You deserve peace too." They stood, there in silence for a long time, the wind carrying the sound of the water between them. For the first time there was no pretense, just truth. When she returned home, her parents were furious. They accused her of ruining everything, of being ungrateful, of throwing away a future most people could only dream of. She listened quietly, then said, "Maybe happiness isn't something you can buy or arrange." Her father glared at her. "You'll regret this," he said coldly. "Maybe," she replied, "but at least the regret will be mine, not yours." That night she packed a small bag and left the mansion quietly. She needed space, away from the pressure, away from the expectations. She found a small apartment near the city's edge, simple and quiet. For the first time in years, she slept without fear. Days turned into weeks. She started teaching at a local community center, helping children with art and reading. The work wasn't glamorous, but it filled her heart in ways luxury never had. Sometimes she still thought about him, wondering how he was, whether he'd found the peace he was looking for. But she didn't reach out. She wanted him to have the freedom she had finally found. Then, one afternoon, as she was helping a child draw, someone knocked on the door of the classroom. When she turned, she saw him standing there. He looked different, calmer, more grounded. The faint sadness in his eyes was gone. The children ran past him, laughing as the class ended. She stood still, unsure what to say. He smiled gently. "You look happier," he said. "I am," she replied honestly. "And you?" He nodded. "Getting there. I took some time away, went back to the places I used to visit before everything happened. It reminded me of who I was and who I want to be now." She smiled faintly. "That's good." He took a small step closer. "I also realized something else," he said quietly. "You were the only person who ever stayed when things were ugly. Not for money, not for fame, just because you cared. That means more than you know." She felt her throat tighten. "I didn't do it for thanks." "I know," he said softly. "That's why it matters." They stood in silence for a moment before he said, "I don't know what the future looks like for either of us, but if you're willing, maybe we could start again, this time as ourselves." She looked at him, unsure whether to cry or smile. "You mean, start over?" He nodded. "No arrangements, no pressure, no lies. Just two people who've both been through too much." A small tear escaped her eye, but it was a happy one this time. "Maybe we can," she said quietly. He smiled. Then let's see where life takes us. Without anyone deciding for us this time, as they walked out together into the sunlight, it felt like the end of a long storm. The world was still uncertain, but for the first time it was their world, not one built on control or fear, but on truth and choice. And that simple freedom felt like the most beautiful thing of all. The days after their reunion passed quietly, like the world had slowed down just for them. The younger sister still worked at the small community center, spending her mornings with the children, helping them paint, read, and laugh again. Life was simple, maybe even ordinary, but it was peaceful, and that was something she hadn't known for a long time. He came by often now, not every day, but enough that she noticed the rhythm of his visits. Sometimes he would bring coffee and pastries. Other times he would just sit in the back of the room, watching her teach with a soft smile that said more than words ever could. They didn't talk much about the past. It was there, unspoken, sitting quietly between them, but it no longer hurt the way it once did. Time had softened the edges of everything that had broken. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the children had gone home, she sat outside on the steps, tired but content. He joined her, holding 2 cups of tea. "You work too hard," he said, handing her one. She smiled. "Maybe. But it feels good to be useful, to do something that matters, even if it's small." He nodded thoughtfully. "You always find meaning in the quiet things. I used to think success was about numbers and status, but watching you, I've realized it's more about peace." She looked at him, smiling softly. "Peace isn't easy to find. You have to lose everything first to understand what it really means." He chuckled quietly. "I guess we both learned that lesson the hard way." For a while they just sat there sipping their tea, watching the sky turn shades of gold and pink. After a moment he said quietly, "I talked to my parents." Her hand paused mid-air. "About us?" He nodded. "I told them everything. The marriage, the truth, how it happened." Her heart started to race. "How did they take it?" He looked down at his cup. "Not well at first. My father was furious. My mother cried. They said it would ruin the family's reputation, that people would never understand. But I told them that I didn't care what people thought anymore." She stared at him, stunned. "You said that?" He nodded. "Yes. Because for the first time I realized the truth doesn't destroy. It heals, and I'm tired of living by everyone else's rules." Her eyes softened, a tear threatening to fall. "You've changed," she said quietly. He smiled faintly. "Maybe I finally became who I was supposed to be." They sat in silence for a while before he added, "They still need time, but they'll come around. Especially when they see you're not the villain they imagined. You're the only one who had the courage to tell the truth." She looked away, her voice barely above a whisper. "I never wanted to be anyone's hero. I just wanted to stop living a lie." He reached over, gently taking her hand. "And that's exactly what makes you one." For the first time, she didn't pull away. Weeks passed, and life began to shift again, quietly, gently, like the seasons changing. They started spending more time together outside the community center. They would visit small cafes, walk through street markets, or drive out to the countryside where the air was cleaner and the noise of the city faded away. It wasn't grand or dramatic, but it felt real. He was rebuilding his business now, not with the same hunger as before, but with a different kind of purpose. He had started a small foundation that helped families who couldn't afford hospital care, inspired by everything he had gone through. When he told her about it, she smiled. "You're turning your pain into something good." He laughed softly. "Maybe you're rubbing off on me." One afternoon, he invited her to visit one of the new community clinics the foundation was funding. It was a modest building in a quiet part of town. The walls were still being painted and volunteers moved around carrying boxes of supplies. He walked beside her, explaining the plans, free checkups, therapy sessions, and a small ward for patients who couldn't pay. "This place," he said, looking around proudly, is what I should have been doing years ago. Not chasing profit, but people." She smiled, watching him speak with that spark in his eyes, the same one she had seen months ago when he talked about finding peace. "You look happy," she said. He turned to her and said softly, "I am. Because for once it feels like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." She nodded, feeling the warmth of his words. For so long their lives had been shaped by others' decisions. Now they were finally shaping their own. As they walked through the empty hallway, he stopped suddenly and looked at her. "You know," he said, "when I was in the coma, I used to hear things, voices sometimes. But one voice was always there, calm, steady, talking to me. I didn't know who it was then, but now I do." She looked surprised. "You heard me?" He nodded slowly. "Every day. I didn't understand the words, but I felt them. And somehow, they kept me from letting go." Her eyes filled with tears. "I didn't think you could hear anything." "I didn't either," he said quietly. "But maybe love works in ways we don't understand." They stood there, looking at each other, the air heavy with emotion. It wasn't the kind of love that came suddenly or loudly. It had grown quietly through pain, truth, and forgiveness. Months passed, and little by little everything began to heal. The wounds, the guilt, even the silence between families. His parents eventually invited her to dinner one evening. It was awkward at first, but when his mother took her hand and said, "Thank you for saving my son," she knew.